do not know, for example, that every time the doctors had to go to one of those ships and take swabs for testing, they would have been taken out to those ships by the officers of the Coast Guard. That too, sir, requires a tremendous amount of bravery. They would not know that the members of the Royal Barbados Police Force are required to be on guard at quarantine facilities to ensure that the individuals don't try to get out. And I tell you now that some of them have tried to get out. Some of them have tried to leave. And the members of the Royal Barbados Police Force have to put themselves on the line to prevent that from happening. I am told, sir, that individuals have gone into police stations coughing and sneezing. But you know what, sir? The police can't tell you, go outside. You have come to the station for assistance. They're on the front line and they have to deal with you, sir. For all of these little things that help our communities and our societies to function, we have to say thank you. And there are a whole set of others. The nurses, they're required to work above and beyond the call of duty during this period. They too have to be thanked. But we're still at the start, and I'm sure that many more accolades will be offered as we get through this. But get through it we will. And I hope that when we emerge on the other side of COVID, that we will emerge as a more resilient Barbados, that we will emerge as a Barbados that has reconnected with those things that we used to hold dear. Things like caring, things like being generous, sharing with neighbors, things of that sort. I hope, sir, that this disease will help to bring us closer to our sense of humanity and to recognizing that existence is not about collecting material goods, but how we can touch the lives of other people. Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that we're going to get through this. I believe that we have a real chance of suppressing the spread of COVID. But we can only do it, sir, if we band together and accept that everybody must make some sacrifice. The citizen has to sacrifice his ability to come and go as he pleases, but it is for the good of all Barbadians. The businesses will have to sacrifice because they can't function as they would like come Sunday morning, come Monday, come Tuesday, come Wednesday. They can't. But it is because we need to eliminate this disease from our shores. Mr. Speaker, I hope to have the opportunity to engage in a dialogue with the country tonight, myself, the Minister of Health, and others, and as we work to try to get a more perfect solution. We welcome questions. People have already been asking for various exemptions. Some are manifestly unreasonable, while others are worthy of consideration. And we will consider everything. But our overriding objective always is to remove the risk of spread. And we can only do that, sir, if we suppress human contact and interaction. I'm obliged to you. Beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Make a second.
Question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Honorable member, I will accommodate you, but in truth and in fact, after the honorable member St. Jovis spoke, it really was your turn to speak prior to move in the second reading. I will permit you, Honorable Member for St. Michael West, I will permit you in these circumstances.
I thank you for permitting me, Mr. Speaker, in these circumstances. Now relax, bro. There are times, Mr. Speaker, in the affairs of men, in the affairs of nations of diverse demographics, pluralistic features, when men recognize the reality of what I call oneness. In our particular circumstance, a recognition that we are together in this, that each of us has a responsibility to be his brother's keeper, that I am not as well as I can be if you are ill or not well, and that the chain of this community is only as strong as the weakest link of every member of this national community, and that the circle of unity is broken when my hand falls from yours or your hand falls from mine. As the Honorable Attorney General would have said, threats of this nature, such as the one we currently face, have a tendency very quickly to equalize the classes and reduce or remove the distinctions. Tendency very quickly to make a nonsense of political divisions and political polarization. We recognize we face a common foe, which means none of us, which intends none of us well. Reinforces a sense of our own collective and individual vulnerability, and indeed, even our mortality. Clearly now the common threat before us calls for common response and a common effort to overcome that threat. Just wanted to set my brief comments in those introductory terms, Mr. Speaker. I am not going to second guess the government of Barbados, this administration, on their approach to the management of this current perilous situation before the country. I am not equally possessed with them of all the knowledge, and I presume and imagine that they act on the basis of the best professional advice at home, perhaps across the region, and maybe even further afield. So I'm not going to second guess. I've already said, and publicly so, that particularly at this time, Barbadians need to trust the government, and that's a call to trust in the institution of government, because the institution of government has served this country well over time, in our brighter moments as well as in our darker days. And we face now seemingly a particularly dark day, and I repeat that call that we trust the institution, trust the government, and hold a presumption that they act in the interests of Barbados, in the totality of that interest, and that they act on the best advice coming from the professional experts in various fields. And the Honorable Member for St. Joseph has spoken pretty clearly here this morning, even clarified one or two things for me, because I sat here with a recognition that I was possessed of one or two minor misconceptions. But even having spoken in that fashion, what I would want dare to suggest, and humbly so, that what has been said here needs to be repeated before this debate ends, and it needs to be repeated outside of these corridors, perhaps multiple times, before the message fully gets through. And there's some things that still remain to be made clear. And the onus is on government, in the interest of its own successful performance and management of this issue, and in the interest of the Barbadian public, to make sure that as much clarity comes to the situation as is possible. There are some issues which will emanate from the decisions taken as to how the economy and the society should function over the next couple of weeks and possibly beyond. Issues thrown up with respect to transportation, logistics around work sites, to the extent that those business operations still have the liberty to function in set time periods. This throws up issues with respect to people movement, to logistics on the work site. The public services has had been referenced also in the private sector. And perhaps it is in addressing some of these that novel ways, innovative ways, different ways may be found to address some of our perennial problems. I think, and I mentioned this just in passing, those on the front line of the tourism sector involved in transportation and movement of people who already are being hit hard by the lack of business, the non-arrival of tourists to our shores, taxi people on the front line who are now put on the bread line. And in an effort to create social distancing, the implications for movement of people by public transport, that becomes an issue. And maybe there's an opportunity for those who normally serve by providing transport in the tourism sector to be given an opportunity to assist with transportation in the public sector under some temporary mechanism which might in fact help to alleviate their problems of loss of earning capacity because they now cannot go to the airport or to the seaport to pick up passengers. I would want to call on the administration to take a very strong line, a very strong and hard line against employers who, with scant regard for the interests of employees, would seek to find ways around the stipulations being enunciated in their interests of furthering their own capital gains, making money, common greed, and who, in that context, and from that point of view, would put the interests of employees and then therefore by extension the interests of the public in secondary position. I believe a very hard and strong, tough line should be taken on that. I am not in any way standing here to try to lay strictures against the private sector in Barbados. I am not accusing the private sector in Barbados of any kind of behavior that seeks to suggest that they're the worst in the world or that they engage in nefarious and undesirable practices with scant respect for the law or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in repeat what I've said from the beginning, that we have to be careful that this opportunity is not used by some who are motivated purely or too much by greed to price gouge and to take advantage of people at a time of challenge and difficulty. And I'm saying further that when it comes to the management of staff and employees, and in the context of these new stipulations, a tough line should be taken by the government of the day against such persons, such practices. With respect to the bill, I had two queries which I hope would be addressed at some point. It seems to me that the stipulation is being made that subsection 5 of section 33 of the Principal Act, which refers to statutory instruments being made subject to negative resolution, should be removed. And I have to query, I'm not a lawyer, I simply query why the proposal, the stipulation, that be removed, section 5 of section 33 of the Principal Act, where it relates to statutory instruments made being subject to negative resolution. Second question I have to raise is this: why not include clause 4 of the Emergency Powers Act, which requires that orders given under this legislation be laid in Parliament? I think the particular clause, if that's the right terminology, states orders effective for 7 days only after being laid, unless continuance is approved by the Parliament of Barbados. I hope I got that clear. If I didn't, I'm sure one of the legal minds will. But having read the legislation, comparing it to the Emergency Powers Act, comparing it to the Principal Act, which is the Emergency Management Act, those two questions occurred to me. And now very quickly, Mr. Speaker, I want to come to matters of the church. And I understand very clearly what the Attorney General has outlined for us. It really will constitute a significant challenge in the Barbadian context, I think. And I'm not saying that the stipulation is out of order, out of place, unreasonable. I'm just saying, in the Barbadian context, to stipulate that the number of mourners at a funeral be reduced or limited to 10. Barbados.
That's to reduce the amount of funerals.
Sorry?
That's to reduce the amount of funerals necessary.
To reduce the amount of funerals necessary. I understand where you're coming from, but to the extent that we may have one or two who pass from this world without being impacted by COVID, we operate in a Barbadian context where there are large families, and I think that is going to pose a challenge. 10 mourners. I can understand the reasoning, because you want to limit crowds to a certain extent, and I understand the aside from my honorable friend from Christchurch East, who says we want to limit funerals. But the reality is that small number of 10 as mourners, that is going to present a challenge in the Barbadian context. Weddings, I don't necessarily know that I fully understand why they can't be deferred, but I suppose a sufficient reason can be found for that if one thinks upon it hard enough. But one would have thought that in the circumstances, a wedding could be deferred a few months down the road. I would imagine. So I just offer that for what it is worth. It may be, however, that there are those who would think that this is a good time to get married because you don't have to have a large guest list and can significantly reduce your expense. I don't know if that's the thinking of the Attorney General. I suspect it is not, but just for what it is worth. But for beyond that, some issues relative to the church. And I understand the pronouncement of churches being closed in keeping with the rest of the society being closed down in some respects. But I want to put this case to the government. The problem that we face, this threat of COVID-19, the problem is in part a physical threat. It's a threat to our physical well-being. It's a threat to life. It's a threat to our economic well-being. But I think the problem needs to be more fully defined than that. In the wake of the physical impact, the economic impact, the psychological, the emotional stress, in the wake of all of that, people will be faced with a sense of fear, strong sense of fear. That's already out there. And that's in part why we are discussing this issue here in this format today, because there's a sense of fear that this thing can get the better of us if we don't get on top of it quickly and early and put measures in place. So there's a sense of fear. It is global and it's quite here at home with us. There's a sense of the threat of loss of employment, loss of opportunity, loss of income, loss of privileges. Serious threat of loss, Mr. Speaker. There's a threat of dislocation, a heightened sense of vulnerability, of exposure to an illness that stalks the land, which is invisible to the natural eye, so to speak. What I'm trying to point to, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that what you are going to be dealing with here as a problem has not only a physical dimension, an economic dimension, it has a very strong spiritual element, a spiritual dynamic. The government will mount and lead a response to the threat that dogs the land, and try to make sure that we retain as best we can a sense of economic well-being. Try to make sure as best we can that the health threat is minimized and that we do not suffer a high incidence of loss of life. All this is in place. But Mr. Speaker, man is a spiritual being. This problem has a spiritual dimension to it. And the government, I urge to realize that in making a response to this problem, there must be a spiritual element brought to bear upon the matter as well. We have had, last weekend, declared here a National Day of Prayer across faith communities in Barbados, and that is fine. But I do not understand how you can have a list of essential services which does not include the church. The church, I am suggesting, and humbly, should be recognized in this particular instance and circumstance as an essential service. As an essential service. Man as a spiritual being cannot do without some form of spiritual nurture. Barbados is a religious community. We celebrate it in everything we do. We've become quite diverse in our faith these days. The point I'm trying to make here is this. The medical professionals will respond. Where it's necessary, the security personnel will play their part. Where it is necessary, all these other essential elements identified come to the table and bring their hands to the work. The church, the government should not fail to recognize the potential role of the church in all of this. And I really do strongly believe it should be declared in this circumstance, recognized in this circumstance, as an essential service. When people are gripped with a sense of fear, a sense of threat, a sense of loss, a sense of dislocation, a sense of bereavement, they look to their inner spiritual self, and that drives them to find a spiritual source of succor and support. The church as well is equipped and resourced with the kind of qualifications among its leadership and its laity that can help in mounting this national response. The government's call, coming from its own lips, all hands on deck, every hand to the plow. We all must make a response on this matter and a contribution in this instance. You cannot list a whole set of entities, and I understand you make provision for application to be made, and that is good, and that is prudent. I'm simply making the church the case from this position for the church to be seen as an essential service. People on the front lines of this business will have to be comforted and counseled. It is not only the protective gear around the physical being that is an essential requirement. People on the front lines of this will be possessed of high levels of stress and fear, and that is normal. They will be separated from their families to some extent. These things create heightened levels of stress and need within people, the level of the mind, at the level of the spirit, for counsel and comfort and consolation. These things are not always found when one goes in a quiet corner and communes with oneself or some higher power or meditates in one's own space. Sometimes it calls for a comforting voice, a counseling voice. The church is possessed of people who cross this land, who are trained in this regard. And your frontline people will need to be counseled. This threat, it is said, is posed most so to those who are elderly or senior years, although the statistics are beginning to suggest otherwise. Those who are elderly and of senior years, Mr. Speaker, none more than them make recourse to spiritual nurture and spiritual help. None more than them lift their eyes to the hills whence comes their help. None more than them. And I do not believe that you can entirely shut them off from recourse to this type of ministry and to this type of help, notwithstanding that we understand person-to-person contact helps to enhance the threat. But Mr. Speaker, these are people now who are even more isolated perhaps than they have been in the past. These are people who feel more sense of being on their own and alone now. These are people who feel more vulnerable now than they did in the past. And if ever they needed this type of help, this type of circumstance shows that up. So when it comes to movement, Mr. Speaker, I think what I would be wanting to suggest is that exemptions should be made for persons within the faith community. And those numbers can be arrived at by discussion with the faith community. An exemption should be made with respect to restriction of movement for purposes, as I intimated just now, but not to allow that, not to include that as one of the exempted restrictions with reference to movement, I think is to deny people of a valuable support mechanism at a very challenging time in their lives. I believe that government, together with the church, can come to an understanding with respect to this, the numbers of persons to be designated. I believe there can be an approved chaplaincy for the purpose. There are chaplains relative to some institutions in Barbados, but not all. You say you can't visit the hospital, you can't visit the geriatric institution. Well, fine, we understand the reason for saying that. I'm just putting the other side of the issue here, and I'm saying perhaps you do a disservice if you completely ruled out that type of ministry, and do you not, and that you do not, and if you do not allow for exemption on restricted movement for that type of purpose. Ten mourners at a funeral service, stipulation, while the family faces the bereavement beyond the moment of the funeral, before and after, and an approved chaplaincy, exemptions on restriction of movement, circumstances such as that allows for pastoral care for a family in a circumstance when they need it. You cannot, with a distant hand, stroke of the pen, simply say 10 mourners at a funeral. I'm not railing against that, although I've cited the challenge. I'm simply saying it calls for a fuller thinking that embraces the view that pastoral care, that bereavement counseling, that support at this time of ultimate sense of loss is critical, and therefore I believe ought to be seriously considered. The government has upped its program with respect to how the most vulnerable families in Barbados are handled, moving from 600 vulnerable families, most vulnerable families, to be helped through the welfare ministry, to 1,500. That is laudable. And I'm not going to get into politics, except for where I would say these are the kind of things that the PDP has called for a while, but this is not the moment. My honorable friend. Sorry? We didn't know about Corona, but we thought ever since that the welfare department or welfare ministry ought to be given more money. I told you when you brought your ministry here to the house, to the well of the house, you needed more money. Anyhow, we are at that point, and the 1,500 of the more vulnerable families in Barbados to be ministered to. Now, those families have to be identified. Do not know what mechanism will be used or is contemplated or is being used to identify those families. And I don't want to lay any crass political charge against the administration. But you and I know both from experience over the years, things like that can descend very easily into the political mire, and the process becomes subject to politicization. It's very easy to say, well, we have to identify 1,500 families. You in your constituency identify X amount. Say, Michael West, Joe, we give you some, identify X amount. It's easy. That's an easy way to go about it. But the point essentially I want to make is not the political point. It is the people's point, really, the people point that I want to make. And that is this. You're dealing with people. And if you want to get to the most vulnerable families, you've got to be able to clearly identify them, having established the criteria. All I'm saying is, Mr. Speaker, the church that deals with this on an everyday, every week basis knows many of those families and could assist the state machinery in identifying those families and servicing those families. That's all I'm saying. We don't have a wealthy church where I go on Sundays and have spiritual nurture. But we do a program like that. And there's several churches across Barbados that do these programs that involve distribution of items, care items, food items, also disbursement of monies to people who are in need. And this the government is doing 1,500 is a pity we have to limit it to so small a number. I wish we could do more. But all I'm saying here is the church, Mr. Speaker, is in a position to help to properly identify those persons and help the government to reach them with this noble intention of this monthly financial subvention. I've heard talk of an augmented National Security Council. I really do strongly believe that the faith groups of Barbados, the faith community, let me put it like that, of Barbados, because it goes across groups, should be on that augmented national security. I know the National Security Council, which is pretty narrow, and that's fine and understood, especially when you're doing certain, dealing with certain matters, security of state and stuff like that. My impression here is that there's now an enlarged or augmented National Security Council. Because of the particular situation and nature of it, you bring in other people. That's understandable. All I'm saying, based on all I've said before, is that the church, and I know I'm going to hear that they are, and I am not convinced that they are. It may be that there is on the council somebody who is a church leader or a church member or identified with the church. Not sure that they're there in the capacity as representing the church. If that is so, I'm happy about it. I also believe that is important. I see press briefings, and I applaud the government for the many press briefings that they have. I have one critique thus far, which I will share with my brother from the city, my honorable brother from the city, quietly. He's not a major. It simply has to do with language. But, you know, it would be good. I see a minister of government, and I see chief medical officer, and I see the czar. Yeah, you know, it would be good symbolically if you had a spiritual leader there with you. Symbolically, it signals a lot to the country. But more than symbol, substantively, it does a lot. Even if the person says nothing, you know, it does a lot. It shows to the national community of this country that the government understands that we're dealing with a problem, a threat to our physical well-being, our economic well-being, implications for the social well-being of Barbados. But the spiritual dynamic is important. We understand that, and therefore they are here. That's the signal it sends. That's a message it conveys. Look, we are a people of faith. We may behave in different ways, but we are people of faith. And we celebrate the God presence even in our national anthem. And I'm making a very strong case. I feel this strongly. And I've spoken to a number of church leaders in the past week and a half, all denominations, so BXC, BEA, you name it. You're familiar with these things, Mr. Speaker, Wesleyan, Nazarene Church, all of them, Pentecostals, all of them. And I think in a more structural way, in a more coordinated way, that element should be included in the response we're mounting to this threat. And I say that humbly. I say that humbly. Let me say this to the Honorable Minister responsible for broadcasting CBC. Listen, Mr. Speaker, I believe this very strongly. You see, people are shut away from their places of worship, the synagogue, the temple, the church, the mosque, you name it. They are home. They are home. I heard a call being made very early for local cultural content to be given expression to, ventilation. See, there's nothing wrong. It will not break CBC. They already broke. There's nothing wrong with designating a half an hour, at least 40 minutes, an hour if you can, for religious broadcasting from all faith groups. On a nightly basis, Mr. Speaker, people are in their homes. You check what's happening in the United States. Domestic violence has gone up. Domestic, in the United States, domestic violence is going to, people are pressed now within walls. It's true. Mr. Speaker, when you tell people you have to stay, some people's release valve is to leave home. It's to go out. People have all kinds of tensions in their relations. Now, our situation perhaps is not as cramped in some circumstances as in certain parts of the U.S., but domestic violence has increased in the U.S. Mr. Speaker, the number of gun purchases, I think it's gone up by about 30%. What do you think is happening, Mr. Speaker? When you confine people, you are causing tensions which normally find some of the release valve to be expressed in these compressed circumstances. All I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, the old lady at home doesn't know anything about the computer. You understand? The laptop, social media, and you may find the odd service coming over there. And CBC is a proper medium for that. And I say that because I know we got MCTV, but MCTV gives you a lot of North American religious broadcasting, which I think we ought to limit down here, to tell you the truth. But local religious broadcasting from faith groups, whether it's Muslim or Hindu or Christian, Rastafarian, because you've now recognized them as well, Mr. Speaker, your group, I think that CBC really ought to be mandated to do at least a half an hour of that every night or hour, and without cost. And without cost. I really strongly believe that. Mr. Speaker, all I'm trying to say here today is that I believe the church has over the years provided an essential service in Barbados, and officially in this circumstance should be recognized as such, to allow for some exemptions from those movement restrictions to a designated number of people agreed to between the government and faith groups. I keep saying the church, I want to say faith groups. We have had problems in Barbados with deviance and violence, issues of law and order in recent times, and I'm simply positing this view, that were it not for the presence and work of the church in this country, it would be much worse. And I'm saying beyond that, therefore, we should not face this situation with any hint or suggestion that the spiritual element, the response of the faith community, is not realized, recognized for its value and for what it can bring to the table. If you define the problem only as a physical threat because of a virus, you are going to see economic implications. You are going to see physical, medical implications. If you look at it more fully, sense of loss, threat of loss, dislocation, vulnerability, sense of hopelessness. If you see these things, then you understand that there's a spiritual element, a spiritual dynamic, and that part of the response must come from that spiritual dynamic as well. I really don't want in any way to signal that I am opposing the government's management of the situation. Like I said, they possess of information which I do not have, and I imagine they'll be guided by the best professional advice and making decisions in the interest of Barbadians. Oh, closed borders, government must make that call. They have the information. Government must make that call. Shut down the whole country, government must make that call. Allow only for certain business to open, set certain hours, government must make that call. We trust the government as an institution. And if ever we find that that trust is not merited, they will speak in different tones. But today, and on this spot, I want to speak in the interests of Barbados, and I want to urge Barbadians to heed the call to be careful, observe the protocols as have been enumerated. I simply appeal to the government to perhaps give a wider berth in terms of its thinking to one or two of the things that I have raised, and I thank you. It's always the same.
Honorable Mr. Michael Sophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move further consideration of the bill be postponed.
Made second that, sir.
The question is that further consideration of this bill be postponed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Further consideration of this bill is hereby postponed.
Order number 16, sir. In the name of the Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness, to move the second reading of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2020.
Honorable member for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to lead the debate on this bill, which is entitled An Act to Amend the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Act Cap 54 to make for provisions for the designation of appropriate lands or building to be considered to be part of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And it is quite clear what this bill is all about. We would have indicated very early that we are trying our very best to ensure or to keep the COVID virus out of the precincts of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, to isolate the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And as such, we've been looking at other facilities to be able to convert them for use by the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I would also have indicated earlier, several weeks ago, that we are planning at all levels for however this particular virus develops in terms of spread. And since we do not know exactly what is going to happen, we have to give ourselves the flexibility to be able to utilize other facilities as needed, or in some cases, change the use of facilities. And so this is what this is all about. And what the bill is seeking to do is to give to the Minister of Health and Wellness, by order, the ability to designate as part of the hospital any lands or buildings that he may think fit to be used as such, and any lands or buildings so designated shall be subject to this act. And I want to start, for example, with the isolation facilities that have been established by the Ministry of Health and Wellness for the management of COVID positive patients. You would recall, Mr. Speaker, that we would have stated in this honorable chamber the fact that the former naval facility at Harrison Point would be retrofitted and refurbished to be able to facilitate the operation of an isolation facility as well as a quarantine facility. And this was part of the plan going forward, and recognizing the fact that the Enmore facility only had the capacity to treat 6 persons at a time, 6 beds maximum. And all along, we were trying desperately to keep the virus out of the country in order to be able to have this facility completed, but we have not been able to do so, obviously, because we are impacted by several events that are happening internationally in terms of shipping and so on. So that the facility is still under construction. But in the meantime, we've had to be flexible and to be able then to create an alternative facility, which is at the Paragon-based Christchurch. And at the moment, that facility is used to house persons who have minor symptoms, persons who are not considered to be serious cases for COVID, and those persons who do not require an isolation facility of the type at Enmore or the type that we are retrofitting at Harrison Point. So that facility is now in use. We also have facilities at St. Lucie, at the St. Lucie District Hospital and Elaine Canterbury Center that we would have indicated are for the use for quarantining persons who are asymptomatic, persons who we are monitoring, persons who would have been in contact with or who had traveled to regions where there are COVID hotspots. And so that facility has been also refurbished and retrofitted. So these are the kind of things that we've been doing. And as a result of that, there's a need to place all of those facilities, well, let me say especially the isolation facilities, under the jurisdiction of the board and management of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And that is really what this bill is all about. We also have the Field Medical Hospital of the Barbados Defense Force Field Medical Facility that is being utilized, and that also has to come under the jurisdiction of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. But we must also be, as I said earlier, be able to, at short notice, depending on how things are spreading with the virus, to be able to move from one type of facility to another, depending on the situation. And so it is possible in the future that a facility that is designated as a quarantine facility could become actually an isolation facility. And if we need other structures, other facilities to be able to utilize for COVID, this bill gives us the opportunity to be able to do so. And that is really the basis for this. I want to take this opportunity also to say that the government has been engaging through the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the Ministry of Health and Wellness with some private medical facilities to be able to utilize those if we need additional space, if we need additional facilities. And this would also be able to encompass the utilization of these facilities. Now, the facility at Harrison Point is really coming along quite well. The construction phase is very, very advanced. We've started to receive some of the specialized equipment that is required for that facility, and we're continuing to make arrangements to be able to get the other pieces of equipment that may be stuck elsewhere at this time. And so that facility, when it comes online, will really increase our capacity in a significant way. At this time, we are also utilizing Paragon Base not only for screening, not only for isolation and quarantine, but also for screening as a screening center. That is the major screening center for COVID, and those operations are also coming along quite well. I think it is important to indicate to Barbadians that given the current situation with COVID, and I'll give an update, that at the moment we have the capacity and we have the ability to be able to manage what is happening right now, even in spite of the fact that Harrison Point is not yet available to us. We are going to do whatever it takes to be able to manage this situation. And we have already started a process of looking at additional facilities and how we could utilize them in the event that we need to have more beds or more space to be able to do our work. I cannot stand here without saying a big thank you, and I've said so before, to all members of staff of all of the healthcare institutions in this country. And I would have thanked Immigration, Customs, the port, the airport, everyone who's involved, pharmacies, pharmacists, the church, This is an all-society effort and an all-society approach for which we are eternally grateful. But I want to thank an institution, and I'm not being biased in any way. There's an institution that demonstrates to Barbadians, I believe, and gives encouragement to all of us that we can do the very best that we can, that duty is an honor, that assisting this country in every aspect of national life and national development is the responsibility of each and every citizen. And sometimes people may not recognize the contribution that is being made by this institution. And I want to highlight it for a couple of minutes because I want to use it to give every citizen and every institution and organization in this country the encouragement that is required for us to go beyond the limit, to understand exactly what is confronting us and what is required from all of us to collectively garner all resources, all our efforts to be able to fight an enemy that is both seen in terms of symptomatic persons and unseen in relation to asymptomatic persons. I want to thank the Chief of Staff and the members of the Barbados Defense Force who we have been relying on. I'm speaking about the Ministry of Health and Wellness in particular, we have been relying to do some things for us that may not necessarily be considered as military, strictly military tasks. And the Defense Force has been with us from day one in terms of providing personnel to help us at the Ministry of Health and Wellness with our Emergency Operations Center, operational and logistics persons who have been assisting us. Also at the ports of entry for surveillance purposes, they've been there at the forefront. And as the Honorable Member for St. Joseph has indicated earlier, that the Coast Guard has been very much involved along with the Defense Force medical personnel in terms of transporting port health officials to cruise ships, boarding cruise ships, assisting in the taking of swabs, or the swabbing, of persons for testing, and also in terms of the quarantine facilities and isolation facility that we have for minor cases. All persons who are collected, the ambulance service at the Defense Force and the medical personnel are the ones that are going to collect patients. And I can go on and on and on, and I really felt compelled to say so because that is an organization, a national organization that all of us can draw strength from, and that all of our institutions and organizations can rise to the occasion, whether or not we believe that we have a direct responsibility in terms of responding to COVID. And so the Ministry of Health and Wellness has been really happy to have been working with them. And that is health is our primary task, of course, so that is what is expected of us. And so that is why I'm saying, and I'm thanking them and thanking all the other organizations that I would have mentioned, and there are many more, because all of us, all are we in this together. And it takes a whole set of things to get the persons on the front line up and running, from people who have to cook, who have to plant. All persons in Barbados are in this together. I would also take this time, Mr. Speaker, to indicate to the public that in spite of the measures that were announced last night by the Honorable Prime Minister and today by the Honorable Attorney General, that the Winston Scott Polyclinic 24-hour service will remain a 24-hour service. We also have two extended hour services at two polyclinics, Morris Bayer Polyclinic in St. Peter and Randall Phillips Polyclinic in Christchurch. I will get back to you with information in relation to how they are going to operate, because we now have to have some discussions with the Transport Board to see how the staff of those polyclinics will be able to make it home in time, so that we will make some determinations as to exactly what time those extended hours will go to, or if we will continue, if we'll be able to continue with the extended hour service. So that information will be passed on as soon as possible. I think that I can also say to Barbadians at this time that we received confirmation yesterday from the ambassador of the Republic of Cuba that the government of Cuba had approved our requests for assistance, technical assistance, and that we are working on the details to get at least 100 nurses, specialist nurses from Cuba, one doctor in charge at this time, but we are looking for some additional resources there, and that the government of Barbados we are grateful, honestly, to the government of Cuba to be able to facilitate this. And this is extremely important in this fight, because moving from a six-bed facility at Enmore to the facility at Harrison Point, which will have at least 38 critical care beds for COVID, and by this I mean beds with ventilators, and also a facility for serious patients that will not require the use of ventilators. This obviously will place a strain on the existing staff at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and recognizing also the fact that we intend as far as possible to be able to continue to produce the high quality service, healthcare service that we would normally be producing for Barbadians at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. We recognize the need to be able to cover some gaps, to be able to provide for rotation, so that those isolation facilities and quarantine facilities, if necessary, are fully staffed. So this certainly is some very good news as far as the Ministry of Health and Wellness is concerned. I would also like to take this opportunity to inform this honorable chamber and the country that we were able yesterday to conduct another 26 tests for COVID. And I believe yesterday was the highest number of tests that were done, and we will continue in this vein. We'll be doing more and more, because it's very, very important for us to be able to do so. And I'm really, really happy, and I thank the Honorable Prime Minister for making the resources available to the ministry to be able to purchase testing kits. This now puts us in the position now to be able to test several more persons. And we are doing that, and we'll continue to do that. But as a result of those tests, 2 more positive cases have been identified, taking us now to 26. One of those is a 65-year-old Barbadian who had traveled to the United States and returned, and that person is now in isolation, and contact tracing has begun, and we are moving aggressively to be able to identify, locate, and to treat those contacts, and I'm confident that we will be able to do so. The other person, we are awaiting some information. I am awaiting information, the details on that other individual, but there are 26 cases. What does that mean? I have to keep saying this all the time. We can manage what we have without any fear or anything of the sort. This is manageable. We are working on it. We are on top of this. We expect that there will be more, and I'm not going to say to Barbadians that there wouldn't be. It is because of the aggressive nature of the contact tracing that we are doing and our intent to be able to contain the spread of this virus that it is absolutely important for us to be able to reach those contacts, to monitor those contacts, and to treat to those contacts in order to prevent the spread. And we are going to do everything possible to be able to achieve that, because we know in the Ministry of Health and Wellness the importance of us being able to do so. And once we can do this and achieve this, this is going to allow us to be able to control that spread and to contain this most vicious virus. And I give the assurance to the Honorable Chamber and to Barbadians that whatever is required on behalf of the Ministry of Health and Wellness will be done, and this country, the government and the social partnership and Barbadians working together, we can do this, we will do this, we must do this. So, Mr. Speaker, in winding down, because I didn't think that there would be a need for me to spend too much time on this, because I'm sure that all honorable members in this chamber would understand clearly the need to amend the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Act to be able to facilitate what is happening now and what could happen in the future, so that we would be able to manage COVID-19, and of course, as restrictions become more and more, including even the way we as parliamentarians operate, the way we as ministers of cabinet operate and ministries operate, it is important to do this at this stage so that we do not have to come back here to do this if we need to be able to add additional properties, additional institutions to the fight against COVID and the treatment of COVID patients. And so, with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I am obliged. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Honorable Member for St. Michael West Central be
St. Michael West
appointed
Central.
Chairman of Committee.
St. Michael Central. St. Michael West Central.
West Central.
The question is that the honorable member for St. Michael West Central be appointed chairman of committees. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The honorable member for St. Michael West Central is so appointed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee.
The question is that the speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
The House is in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 stand par.
question is that clause 1 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
Seconder, please. The question is that clause 2 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the Speaker the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honor members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be passed and cited as the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Act.
I second that, sir.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited.
A committal, sir, of notices.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $4,200,000 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2019-2020 as shown in supplementary estimates number 17, 2019-2020.
Revert to government business. Order number 17, sir. In the name of the Honorable Leader of the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of sums of money for the service of this item.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve into Standing Finance Committee. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
The House is in committee.
In the name of the Honorable Minister of Finance, the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to grant the sum of $200,000 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2019 to 2020 as shown in the supplementary estimates number 17, 2019 to 2020, which form the schedule to the resolution. Head 35, Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, in the amount of $1,200,000.
Honourable Member for Church East Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, as we approach the end of the financial year, and certainly in the midst of the government's response to COVID-19, the sums of money being requested in this resolution in total, sir, is to respond on two fronts, and I'll speak as extensive as I can, sir, just to bring the House as up to date as possible. Last Friday, the Prime Minister announced a series of measures in conclusion to the appropriation bill, which spoke to what the government would put in place, sir, with respect to the unprecedented impact with respect to the global economy and how it will affect Barbados. And the household survival program, sir, as articulated by the Prime Minister in terms of response, in terms of changes that we will make with respect to the upcoming budget. In analysis, sir, with respect to our current situation as it relates to the end of this financial year, in reviewing the data with respect to the floor on social spending, we recognize that between now and Tuesday of next week, sir, that there will be some $1.2 million, which would mean that we will potentially, sir, be short of the target with respect to the floor on social spending. And so whilst all the other departments within the context of the program, sir, have been met with respect to the spending, we felt that given the circumstances, certainly as we are now, with respect to being able to ensure that we can protect families, sir, that rather than allow these monies to lapse and not meet that target, that we would put these monies, sir, into the Child Care Board, now, $1.2 million, in order to ensure, sir, that families with 4 or more children, sir, certainly to support the effort that the Prime Minister announced, and I know that the Welfare Department will, in a sense, sir, accelerate over the course of the coming weeks and months, that to support those families, sir, especially with children, with 4 or more children, under the age of 21, sir, I think it's important to recognize that there will be an impact on, significantly so, sir, on a large part of the society with respect to the impact of the economy, that these sums of monies will be placed in the Child Care Board in order to advance, sir, some of that relief with respect to the household survival program, which will, in a sense, sir, ensure that we provide and accelerate with respect to those sums. Now, the truth is, sir, this is a mechanism that we are just employing just to ensure that, as I said before, the monies don't lapse, but that we are capable, sir, with respect to the preparation that the Welfare Department is now currently undertaking, that with respect to the beginning of the next financial year, that there is actually monies immediately available to be capable of ensuring that whatever has been left off at the end of this financial year can continue, sir, within the context of the first couple of weeks in April, so that those most vulnerable families can get the support that they want. Whilst this is not necessarily currently the mandate of child care in that context, because obviously Child Care Board has a greater set of circumstances that they look at with respect to the care of children, we felt that it was critical at this time to have a whole of government approach with respect to being able to support families, and therefore in a very clear sense, the Child Care Board will work with the Welfare Department, and I know the Honourable Member for St. Thomas has been working, as she would represented in the estimates here, with respect to identification of the most vulnerable families in the country, and therefore coming out of that data, this is simply a mechanism for government now not to work in silos, but to support certainly the ability to be able to bring as urgently relief that we can bring to families. And therefore, given that mandate, we want to be able to accelerate from within the context of those families that are most vulnerable and have support given immediately with respect to those families. It is critical, sir, that where we are now, and as we have coming very rapidly to the end of this financial year and having made monies available to certainly the Ministry of Health in terms of response for COVID-19, in terms of preparedness, our focus and gaze, yes, sir, is to continue to support the medical response. But as we transition now to this particular period, especially in the context of the announcement of the curfew and the impact that will have certainly on a lot of families with respect to the closure of businesses, that it is critically important right now, sir, that the government and all of its agencies works as seamlessly together in order to ensure that all persons who we can touch to bring some relief, that we do so as quickly as possible. And therefore, this particular provision being asked here is just to ensure that we can accelerate the relief as quickly as possible. Having said that, sir, I want to indicate that obviously we will have to make some adjustments to the appropriations bill that we just passed in terms of in the same way that the Attorney General has announced in a sense essential services with respect to previous debate. The reality is now that we have to do that similarly, a similar process with respect to the programs of government, and therefore whilst persons will continue to work from home in that context, we are in the process, sir, of determining which programs of government will be suspended. More information will be provided with respect to that in order to ensure that we can first contain the public health threat that COVID-19 presents, and then once the Barbadians heed, sir, the call with respect to the medical officials and the impact of the curfew, that we can bring certainly within 2 weeks, sir, those numbers down, so that we can then focus, sir, on the economics of being able to bring the economy back as far as we can with respect to a stimulus. And therefore, it is critically important that as we do this part, that we also ensure that we contain the spread of the virus so that we can bring relief to those persons from an economic perspective, sir, so that persons can go about their day-to-day business as normally as possible. And so certainly we anticipate that with the cooperation, sir, of all Barbadians, that we will be able to stem certainly the spread or further spread with respect to COVID-19, and that on April 15th, that we should be able to open back the country. That is our anticipation, sir, with the cooperation of Barbadians, to be able to open back the country for some normalization of services, generally speaking, across the economy, so that we can start to get things rolling again. Of course, sir, as you well know, the global economy still will be reeling with respect to the pandemic, and therefore it is critically important right now that we bring relief to those families, obviously, who would be most affected by one, loss of jobs, lack of economic activity, and therefore we've crafted a solution that will respond not just to them, but in order to be able to keep businesses going as much as we can. Now, let me take the opportunity, sir, just to indicate through you, sir, to the country that having announced a number of measures which the AG would have announced in the previous bill, that there are a few things that I want to indicate to the country, sir, that certainly over the course of the next 2 weeks will not happen. And therefore, from an operational perspective, as it relates to the Barbados Revenue Authority, that the Revenue Authority, sir, working with the Barbados Licensing Authority, will not be issuing, sir, any stickers. So therefore, there will be no need for any member of the public to go to the Revenue Authority with respect to the issuing of stickers for the back of the car. That will be suspended, so that, and we will communicate certainly that officially to the public in the appropriate announcement. I'm saying that here because as we are trying to contain, sir, the spread and to ensure that we protect the workers, there will be no need for that activity to take place with the Revenue Authority at any of its junctures. So Barbadians can feel comfortable, sir, that there will be no need for the issuing of stickers for any vehicles that may expire certainly between now and April 15th. So there's no need to go to the Revenue Authority to conduct that business on behalf of certainly any vehicles that may expire during that time. Similarly, sir, as it relates to the renewal of driver's licenses that may expire during that time, sir, we will make provision, sir, with respect to being able to ensure that no one is penalized for not renewing their driver's license during that time. And therefore, again, there will be no need for persons to come into the Revenue Authority or the Licensing Authority to deal with that, because we appreciate, sir, that whilst those are things that people may wish to continue to do, we want to say to citizens that those two specific activities, which typically represent high volume traffic for those agencies, will no longer be required. Let me take this opportunity as well, sir, to say to all Barbadians who are impacted with respect to now being unemployed, that the National Insurance Scheme has put out guidance specifically for how to access and to make applications, sir, with respect to the online facilities in order to be able to access their unemployment benefits, and similarly sickness and the other benefits that they normally dispense. And I know that you sir, have been in the vanguard of ensuring that operationally the National Insurance Scheme would be able to deliver, certainly with respect to those increasing claims. And I want to take this particular opportunity to say to all of Barbados that the government of Barbados has moved swiftly to advance a number of plans that we had in place with respect to the digitization. Whilst everything may not necessarily be ready as we would have liked, I want to urge all Barbadians to take the time to access those systems digitally so that we reduce the physical contact that is required, certainly within the next 2 weeks, in terms of being able to dispense with some of these services. And so the government, whilst working in a scaled down environment, will ramp up, sir, our digital presence for citizens to be able to access some of these services. At some point, certainly over the next few months, I know that we will be in a position, again, as I referenced the driver's licenses, that we will be in a position, sir, to have an online facility to be able to renew that. That is not available right now, but all we are saying at this point is that if your driver's license expires within the next 2 weeks, there will be no need to go into the licensing authority to renew as such. And therefore, once the government opens back for business, then we will just simply validate that period. There will be no penalties or interest with respect to that, but I just want to give citizens the assurance that only for those very critical things that you need to go into these government departments for, that you would be able to do. And the simple message, sir, is to stay at home in order to ensure that we can help contain the spread with respect to these things. So again, sir, no person should be required to renew their driver's license. None of those stickers will be issued certainly over the next 2 weeks, and so therefore persons should not go to the Revenue Authority or the Licensing Authority to conduct any of those specific services, given the mandate for us to be able to contain the spread. Now, the reality is, sir, is that at this stage, we have to ensure that we do all that we can, sir, to allow Barbadians to stay certainly at home with respect to being able to contain the spread of the virus, and therefore we are in a position, sir, to make some of these critical announcements at this stage. But, sir, this is a critical moment in the country, and these supplementaries that have come before this chamber today, I know I will speak to the other head afterwards, but I felt it was important, sir, to take the opportunity to indicate to Barbadians that things have changed, and certainly with respect to the anticipated, the announcement of the curfew, that it is not business as usual. And in the same way that we have come here to do the supplementary to put with respect to the Child Care Board in order to advance those, the relief to those families with 4 children or more, specifically during this time, that these are extraordinary times, and therefore we have to adapt our systems with respect to being able to do that. Now, sir, in addition, we want to assure all Barbadians that the financial resources that are required to deal with this fight against COVID, the member for the city certainly has indicated that all of his staff and the appropriate agencies that are involved have been working, sir, together tirelessly, sir, since the beginning of this year, and therefore it is now time for Barbadians to play their part. We will make the necessary financial resources available, but at the end of it, it requires, sir, the absolute participation of all Barbadians to ensure that we can first contain the spread of the virus, and once we've successfully done that, sir, then we can focus more in a more laser-like fashion with respect to the relief and the stimulus that we anticipate that the government can deliver. But the government can only deliver that stimulus if after this 2-week curfew session, that yes, there are provisions being made for certain business activities to take place. People still have to go to the supermarket, people still have to go to the doctor, people still have to go to the pharmacies and the like, but those should be the very limited activities, sir, that people engage in, and that you go and only access those services as required. And so therefore we have done all that we can, sir, at this stage with respect to being able to ensure that, one, we provide we encourage certainly at this stage, and I know that whilst it's critical, I want to take the opportunity to say to Barbadians officially that I know that it's not the time that people may wish to hear, but for those persons, certainly, sir, who will benefit from the compensatory income credit, that we're encouraging those persons to file as early as possible, as soon as the filing season starts on April 1st, sir. I'm asking those persons who have earned between $25,000 and $35,000 to file their income taxes as quickly as possible so that we can assess them and have those compensatory income credits paid as early as we can pay them, sir, as well as those persons who will benefit from the reverse tax credits to do so as early as possible in April, so that the government, in an effort in order to ensure that we can, those persons who may perhaps be most vulnerable, that we can deliver those credits to them as early as possible, so that we can help with respect to being able to put some monies into people's pockets, simply because, sir, we recognize that the economy will take a hit, and therefore the government wants to be in a position to use all of its administrative powers to be capable, sir, of ensuring that those persons who need it most right now can at least have the benefit with respect to that. And so, sir, with those very, 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 very few words, I wish to move that Head 35 stamp part.
The question is that Head 35 stamp part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Head 34, Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, in the amount of $3 million.
The honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Yes, sir. The sums of money being requested here, sir, And it's it's a very interesting time, sir, given that globally, the global supply chain, sir, is rapidly changing as we see it. And therefore, the sums of money being asked, sir, at this time is to ensure that the government of Barbados, one, can support the operations of LIAT. And let me just say, sir, that for the benefit of not just the members of the chamber, but certainly for the country, part of the reason that we have not closed our borders, and certainly the minister, the member for the city can attest, that Barbados is still in the process of acquiring, sir, a number of critical items that are required for the ordinary daily function, not just of the healthcare system, but certainly for the whole of the economy. And part of what is being asked for LIAT in response to, with respect to COVID-19, is that operationally, sir, as there's limited aircraft certainly coming into the country, we still have to move stuff around the region, both not just people, but also cargo as well in a short space of time. And I can say to you, sir, that notwithstanding the challenges over the years with respect to issues with LIAT, at this particular point in time, where there's limited access with respect to aircraft, commercial aircraft coming into Barbados, we still have a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but certainly to our neighbors, to ensure that where it is necessary, sir, because you would recall, sir, that there are still people that access medical services in Barbados with respect to citizens from the OECS. But the focus now, sir, is to transition, in a sense, part of LIAT's operation to be capable of allowing cargo to move more quickly across the region. And therefore, the sums of money being asked, sir, is to allow for the operation of LIAT to continue, sir, such that we are capable of maintaining level connectivity across the region. Now, sir, as you well know, this government is committed, one, not just because of our responsibility for the CSME, but this government is absolutely committed to regional integration. And at this critical time, sir, notwithstanding, as I said, sir, the challenges of LIAT and the compending issues that we've seen over the years, we believe, sir, that at this particular point in time, that leadership is important in being able to ensure that logistically, that we are capable within the region of maintaining a level of connectivity that allows us to connect with one another. I know that there's been some talk regionally, sir, or recently, as I say, with respect to the fact that some persons, nationals, have been left outside of their borders. The reality is, sir, that this government is committed to ensuring that logistically we can move stuff, and as well as personnel as required, sir, around the region. And I think it is critically important that we support that effort in that vein. And so I know, sir, that for the country, as we are going through this particular process, that whilst over the course of the next 2 weeks, it is critical that persons stay at home and stay away from places unless they absolutely have to engage in those activities. We want to give the assurance that the government is still looking at all of the options that are available to us to ensure that we can still engage the world, that we can still get our critical items into the country, and at the same time, sir, that we can give support to some of our regional neighbors as may be required, because at the end of the day, sir, we are one Caribbean. And with those few words, sir, I beg to move that Head 34 stand part.
Beg second that, sir.
The question is that Head 34 stand part. All honour members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one money resolution in committee.
Second that, sir.
The question is, I do now report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one money resolution. All honor members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one money resolution in committee. All members for Christchurch.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution be read the first time.
Beg to second that, sir.
The question is that this resolution be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution be read a second time.
The question is that this resolution be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Beg to second that, sir.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Order number 15, sir. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General, Minister of Legal Affairs, to resume the debate on the second reading of the Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2000.
Honorable members and Joseph. Please turn on your mic.
By way of wrap up, I just wish to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his comments. I should give notice that as a procedural matter, but we'll probably get to it in committee. But I just want to give notice of it now to the chamber. It is proposed to amend the bill that has been tabled to allow for Cabinet to delegate to the Prime Minister the power to make such directives as may be required in the public interest. There's nothing sinister behind this. In fact, sir, it is purely out of necessity because this situation is very fluid. Orders may need to be made in respect of a whole raft of things that can happen at a moment's notice. It can happen in the dead of the night. It can happen in the early hours of the morning. The orders you would appreciate that might be required to be made are myriad, and not easily, I couldn't easily tell you what the entire raft of them would be. So given that it would not always be possible to convene a meeting of cabinet, we might end up having to convene meetings of cabinet 6 times a day. There might be a reason for the Prime Minister to make a particular order, but we would have to try and convene a cabinet meeting at 2 o'clock in the morning. With this kind of emergency, we cannot afford to hamstring ourselves in this way, and therefore it is proposed, sir, as I said, I'll move it in committee, but it is proposed that Cabinet should be able to delegate to the Prime Minister the power to make such directives under this legislation as may be required in the public interest. I believe that it is the appropriate thing to do. It is the practicable measure, and I support that amendment. So when we get to committee, I'll be moving that amendment, and of course the Leader of the Opposition can weigh in on it at that time. I'm grateful for the support of honourable members, and I hope that we will all join, notwithstanding that churches and other religious institutions will be closed, that we can still join each other in prayer in our own places for the safety of all of Barbados and for the safety of our families wherever in the world they may be. I beg to move. I've already moved that this be read a second time. So. Committee?
Honorable the question that this bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this House resolve itself into committee. That you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee.
Beg to second that, sir.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee, into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
House is in committee.
Clause 1.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. All honour members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Question is that clause 2 stand part. All honour members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
Take the second.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. All honour members in favor, please say aye. Sorry. Hold on 1 second. You wanted to, sorry, my apologies.
You will speak now.
Second.
No, he didn't say.
All right.
Yeah, clause 3.
In clause 3, Mr. Chairman of Committees, I'd like to propose an amendment to insert clause 6. The words are shown on the amended bill, which I've shown to you, sir, and which the Leader of the Opposition has seen. And then what was clause 6 would be consequentially renumbered to be clause 7.
I'll remember for Sir Michael West.
Mr. Chairman, whereas I offer support on the substantive measure brought before us, this amendment that is being proposed is not one that finds favor with me. If I am reading correctly, in an order made pursuant to subsection 4 and 5, that's where we are, right? The Cabinet may delegate to the Prime Minister the power to make such directives as may be required in the public interest. Such orders refer, Mr. Speaker, to orders made under Section 3 of the Emergency Powers Act, Cap 161, Section 6 and 7 of the Quarantine Act, Cap 53, Section 3 of the Miscellaneous Controls Act, Cap 329, and several regulations related to the Health Services Communicable and Notifiable Diseases, 1969. Now, I am not suggesting anything sinister. I'm not suggesting that it is anticipated that there will be anything sinister. And notwithstanding the support I give to the measure substantively, already, Mr. Speaker, in this parliamentary setup, we have more than in theory, but substantially so in practice, cabinet dominance obtaining right here because of the composition of the cabinet, the numbers, cabinet dominance over this parliament. Now that always exists in all kinds of parliamentary system, but it exists to an exaggerated extent in our current circumstances here in the Parliament of Barbados. The cabinet under the measure that we are approving here today is being given major powers. This is under the Emergency Management Act. The cabinet is being given major powers to issue orders. Now we want further to give to one embodiment, and I respect the office of Prime Minister and I respect the holder of the office. But what we are seeking to do here is to put in the hands of one individual, and in my view, inordinate amount of power to give directives, having been delegated those powers by the Cabinet of Barbados. I do not know that we need to do that in this day and age with all of the technology that we have. We've already heard that we've had one cabinet meeting held yesterday using the facility of Zoom. I do not know that we need to do that. And if we have to delegate certain powers to the Prime Minister or any minister for that matter, in a circumstance such as this where we're operating on the Emergency Management Act and issuing orders under the Emergency Powers Act, there should be some means for immediate or soon validation of those directives, or there should be some provision for some process, minimal though it may be, of consultation between the Prime Minister, the Her Excellency, the Governor General, Leader of the Opposition, somebody. I do not support at all the placing of this inordinate amount of power in any one pair of hands. I think we should provide some form of validation soon after the directive is issued, perhaps some process of consultation before the directive is issued by whatever means. We already have in our liberal democracy system, our Westminster system, the feature of prime ministerial power, and we are extending that. I don't suggest we anticipate any sinister doings. That is not where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a theoretical perspective. I believe in the preservation of constitutional powers. We have to face an emergency, and we should find better mechanisms to deal with things like that, rather than simply place all of these powers in the hands of one person in a context where we're operating on the emergency situation, emergency powers. I object very strenuously to this one.
Honourable Member St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker.
Chairman, sir.
I know the honourable member's objections, but I don't know that any point is made by me repeating what I've already offered to the chamber. There's a reason why the Governor General is going to be asked to declare a state of emergency. This is not business as usual, and the executive has to be able. Clause 3, stand part as amended.
The question is that Clause 3, as amended, stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
Question is that Clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Beg to move that Clause 5 stand part.
Beg second.
The question is that Clause 5 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Beg second that.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
That's it. Rand is finished.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we have come to the end of today's sitting, and I beg to move the adjournment of the sitting until the 17th of April at 10 a.m.
Beg to second that, sir.
The question is that this honorable chamber be no, he didn't.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited.
Was the bill read a third time, honorable member?
I thought I did that, but I beg to move it read a third time.
Beg to second. It was.
So
But we could
moved,
just
sir.
do it again.
The question is,
The question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
aye.
Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So with that, we have come to the end of today's sitting, and I beg to move the adjournment of the House until the 17th of April at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber be adjourned until the 17th day of April at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until the 17th day of April at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.